Judge Deborah H. Goldstein's soon-to-be-released book is a collection of her short stories. She is also an author of Kensington's 5-book Sarah Blair mystery series that features a woman who finds being in the kitchen more frightening than murder, as well as Should Have Played Poker and Maize in Blue. You can find out more about this winner of IPPY, Silver Falchion, AWC, and BWR awards, and Agatha, Anthony, Derringer, and Claymore finalists at www.deborahhgoldstein.com. The link is in the show notes. Welcome to Mysteries to Die For. I am TG Wolff, and I'm here with Jack, my piano player and producer. This is a podcast where we combine storytelling with original music to put you at the heart of a mystery. All of our stories are structured to challenge you to beat the detective to the solution. Jack and I perform these live, front to back, no fakes, no breaks, no retakes. The rules for law and order create the boundaries for civil coexistence, and, ideally, the backdrops for individuals, families, and companies to grow and thrive. Breaking these rules puts civil order at risk, and while murder is the big daddy of crimes, codified ordinances across municipal subdivisions, counties, states, and countries show the nearly endless ways there are to create mayhem. This season, we put our detective skills to the test. This is Season 8, Anything But Murder. And here we are at Episode 7, where betrayal is the featured crime. This is Opera Dinner Club by Deborah H. Goldstein.
So because this amazing story takes place, during Nazi Germany, I think if we should stick with the piano because of the movie The Pianist,
This does alternate between storytelling in 1986 and in
40-something?
I'm scrolling
1940, 30...
In 1935.
35. Oh, that's early. Okay. Well, we'll be doing the
piano.
The grand piano.
I love the sound of a grand piano.
Yeah, I just got to transpose it all down a solid octave so I have deeper notes. All right. And let's find ourselves a chord progression.
You like that one?
Sorry, I thought we were starting.
I thought you were looking for
chord progression. All right.
I thought you were looking for one.
Let's go.
Okay, he found one. And the opera played on, 1986. After the door to the memory unit slammed shut behind us, the male nurse, whose name tag said Peter, guided me down the hall to the octogenarian Melinda Brooks's room. From where we were, I could hear the notes of what had to be a recording of a harmonious operatic piece. The soaring music reached a crescendo as we reached the last room on the hall. La Bohème, I said. The nurse shrugged. I'm not familiar with that song. Except for Mrs. Brooks, everyone around here seems fixated on big band or 1940s music. I listened more closely as a different song from La Bohème played. She's listening to the score from a famous opera. Well, he said, it must have had some special meaning for her. She runs it on loop all day. It's gotten to the point that most of us treat it as white noise. Come to think of it, though, you might want to lower the sound, but keep it on when you're talking to her. Except for mealtime, she gets agitated when she doesn't hear it. Part of her dementia, I guess. I wondered how far her dementia had progressed. Perhaps my trip would end up being futile. As if Peter read my mind, he said, except for when someone turns her music off, she's a sweet lady. She spends all day sitting by the window with her music playing as she fluctuates between being lost in her own world and being sharp as a tack. Peter opened the door to the room and walked in ahead of me. Mrs. Brooks, you have a guest. She turned her head away from the window and stared at me. If blue eyes could twinkle amidst wrinkled face, hers did. Helen, she said, reaching her blue-veined hand out to me. It's been a long time. I've missed you. I didn't know how to answer her seeming recognition of me, but Peter knelt by her chair. He gently put his hand on her arm and said, Mrs. Brooks, this is the reporter I told you was coming to visit, the one who wants to interview you for a story she's writing. Your daughter said you agreed to talk to her. Is that still okay? Oh yes, Ari. I'm thrilled someone is finally willing to look into the mystery of which member of our opera dinner group turned the Rothmans into the Nazis. Rising, Peter spoke softly to me. It's not a good sign when she calls me Ari. I think it may be one of those days where one minute she mumbles memories from the past and the next she's in the room with you. If you need me, I'll be at the nurse's station. Thanks, I answered. I pulled the only other chair in the room closer to Mrs. Brooks' recliner. Seated, I placed my tape recorder near a plate of cookies lying on the small marble inlaid table next to her chair. I'm going to record our conversation. Is that all right? At this point, getting her permission was a mere formality. I pushed the record button and said, Today is March 1st, 1986. My name is Jessica Helen Rothman, and I'm conducting an interview with Mrs. Melinda Brooks. When I paused to take a breath, Mrs. Brooks looked more closely at me. You're not my Helen, are you? No, ma'am. I'm not the one you're thinking of. The Helen Rothman you knew was my grandmother. She looked me up and down and then matter-of-factly said, You have her violet eyes. I've been told that. With her gnarled hands, Mrs. Brooks carefully picked up a plate of cookies and offered it to me. The food here leaves something to be desired, but these are quite good. I accepted a chocolate chip one. She picked an oatmeal raisin before returning the plate to the table. She was right about them. We both munched our cookies. Only after Mrs. Brooks wiped a crumb from her lip did she speak again. What makes you want to interview an old woman about her memories? Are you searching for your Jewish roots? In a way, I am, I said. My father recently died. My condolences, she said, and then prompted you to learn more about your heritage? Yes, I said. And why is that? Mrs. Brooks asked. Because, I said, other than occasionally mentioning that his parents were wealthy patrons of the arts in Vienna, my father never wanted to talk about them. Just before he died, apparently realizing it was his last chance, he decided to share his family history with me. Mrs. Brooks nodded. That's not unusual. What did your father tell you? Well, he told me that his father was a well-respected doctor and his mother a patron of the arts, especially opera. They lived in a fancy building in which they owned 2 apartments. His father used one for his medical practice and the other the family lived in. Because of their status, his parents had a box at the opera house, regularly lent art from their personal collection to the museum, enjoyed invitations to all the best parties, and had servants to care for them, and my father. All of that is true, Mrs. Brooks said, but that wouldn't bring you here to see me today. You're right, I replied. My father said his parents were so involved in Vienna's high society that they never thought they would be touched by Hitler's activities. And by the time they realized they were in danger from the Nazi regime, it was too late for them to emigrate. Through favors and bribery, they bought my father's passage to the United States to live with my mother's brothers, and my voice trailed off. What I was about to say seemed preposterous, even as I thought it. And what? Mrs. Brooks demanded. I swallowed and said, My father claimed that after he was safely gone, my grandmother launched one of the most devious smuggling rings of the war out of her dining room. He referred to it as the Opera Diner Club. He told you the truth. Mrs. Brooks paused as if gathering her thoughts. We were a diverse group. There were, of course, your grandparents, Helen and Wilhelm, and my sweet Albert and me. Although I often visited our permanent home in London, we officially were living in Vienna that year, so Albert could teach at the university. 2 other couples, the Edgertons and the Schmidts, the Rothsman servants, filled out the seats around the table. Tell me, what made you seek me, the only one still alive, out? I decided to be honest with Mrs. Brooks, to understand what happened to my grandparents. My father hinted there was a sinister tale behind their being taken off to the camps. She met my gaze, and the seed of what he said has turned into a journalistic challenge for you. Yes, I said. Mrs. Brooks may have dementia, but at that moment, she had my number. Breaking our gaze, she looked in the direction from which La Boheme continued playing. You know, Helen, when the opera's group dinner invitations stopped coming, we knew something was drastically wrong. The 19th... Oops, sorry.
I was going to say, should I go shut up the dogs?
I don't know. I don't know that it's worth breaking what we're doing because they're just going to start barking again.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a puppy, and she's loud nowadays.
And she's little, but she's got a Tasmanian devil of a voice. So
Yeah, well, she learned it from your dogs, darn it. She wasn't barking until we brought her here.
that's what he says.
She doesn't even bark in our apartment. She only barks when I bring her here.
Because she's trying to get Kane to play with her.
Apparently. Anyway, so that's my dog.
Sorry if y'all can hear it in the background. We're hoping that these directional microphones do not pick it up.
It's hard to tell, to be honest. All right, new chord progression.
The 1934 Opera Dinner Club, 1986. For a second, I thought Mrs. Brooks had drifted back to thinking I was my grandmother. Then she said, "It'll be easier for you to tell me what you already know about your grandmother and the dinner club, and then let me try to fill in the blanks." I hesitated. How much should I tell or trust Mrs. Brooks? For all I knew, she was the group's traitor. Still, if I didn't share some of my information with her, how could I expect her to share hers with me? I couldn't take a chance on her clamming up. I decided to volunteer, only the basics. I know that in 1934, my grandmother, Helen, attended a Salzburg performance of Richard Strauss's Die Liebe der Donne. Sorry if I butchered that. The conductor that evening was the director of the Munich Opera House, Clemens Krauss. Helen and he had met several times when she attended operas he conducted in Germany and Austria. They began exchanging letters. When she wrote him that she and her husband, Wilhelm, would be attending the Salzburg performance, he invited them to join his wife and him for the after-the-show dinner. She accepted, Mrs. Brooks said. If you could have seen how beautiful she looked that night, her violet gown exactly matched her eyes. She glanced up at me. The same eyes you inherited. From the pictures I'd seen of my grandmother from happier times, I could imagine the contrast of her gown with her animated face as her dark chocolate hair contrasted with her violet eyes and full red lips. As this thought went through my mind, I realized that Mrs. Brooks must have been there too. You were there? Yes, Mrs. Brooks said. It was a small, hand-picked group, the Krauses, your grandparents, 2 sisters from London, Lloyd and Victoria Edgerton, and Albert and me. Was there any connection among any of you, I asked? Other than loving opera and realizing we had all attended some of the same music performances and fundraising events, none of us knew or could figure out, Mrs. Brooks said. We were of different faiths, and all the women stayed home while their husbands worked. How about a link between the men's professions? Nothing obvious, Mrs. Brooks said. Your grandfather practiced medicine. Clemens Krauss was a music conductor. Lloyd Edgerton had an armaments business. And my Albert taught philosophy at the university. You're right, I said. I don't see anything in common except possible ties to the university. That's a place my father occasionally talked about. He said his parents would drive him by the campus and tell him that he would go there when he was older. The war changed that. It did for lots of people, Mrs. Brooks noted. But back to dinner. The food was excellent, and as you can imagine, the talk lively. Of course, as it's wont to do, the conversation turned to politics. While the men spoke of the animosity to Hitler and what he stood for, it was Mrs. Krauss who made a lasting impression on all of us. Was she beautiful? I asked. Mrs. Brooks shook her head. No, she was a plain-looking woman with a beautiful soul. It was her words that reached our hearts. I couldn't imagine what Mrs. Cross could have possibly said about the opera that made such an impression. What did Mrs. Cross say? Well, she talked about her Jewish friends and the difficulties they were beginning to face in Germany and Austria, Mrs. Brooks said. When we asked what she meant, Mrs. Cross told us how their activities and ability to travel were being limited. The few who were allowed to leave the country were prohibited from taking any of their money or possessions. Having read about these restrictions in my history books, I was not surprised to hear this. I waited for her to continue. Well, you can imagine how strongly we all express our indignation before the conversation moved to a happier topic, Mrs. Brooks said. I cleared my throat, hoping the sound would convey my agreement and be enough to keep Mrs. Brooks talking. She appeared to be getting fatigued. Shortly before that evening ended, she said, when we were all in a very jovial mood from the abundant food and drink, Helen, who hadn't spoken much after Mrs. Cross's remarks, invited us to attend the performance of the Vienna Opera the next week, followed by dinner at her home. The Krauses and the sisters declined, but the Edgertons and us accepted Helen's invitation. Had my Albert known what we would end up doing because of our dinner at the Rothmans, I'm sure he would have found a way of backing out of attending. Controlling my excitement so as not to overwhelm Mrs. Brooks, I said, "Is that the night my grandmother created the smuggling ring?" Mrs. Brooks laughed. We never considered ourselves a smuggling ring. Rather, we were opera lovers who dined together. It simply happened that those of us who were permitted to travel, as proven by our passports, would go home wearing or carrying various furs, jewelry, clothing, and money of Jews who hoped to escape the Nazis by fleeing to London. The look Mrs. Brooks gave me reminded me of the ones made by my elementary school teachers who had wanted to make their point. Thanks to your grandmother Helen's ingenuity, many of those poor Jews who made it to England legally, or by using forged documents, were able to start their new lives with some of their own possessions. Did my grandmother ever try to have things smuggled to London for herself? Oh, heavens no, Mrs. Brooks said. Unlike so many of us, Helen never thought of herself. Other than calling in favors to get your father out of the country, her only motivation was to help others. That's why we created our opera dinner club and masterminded its success. My mouth involuntarily opened, but I didn't say anything. You look surprised that she pulled this all off, Mrs. Brooks said. You have your grandmother's eyes, but not her poker face. I've never been good at hiding my emotions or reactions, I admitted. A pity, Mrs. Brooks said. You would have had trouble being believed when you crossed the border. How did that work? I asked. Very simply. Helen procured our opera tickets and then provided an after-the-performance meal at her home. When we arrived, the clothing, money, or jewelry would already be there. After dessert, she assigned the possessions to be smuggled and would tell us who she determined should make the next border crossing. She staggered our trips so no more than 2 of us would be at a border crossing at the same time. On dinner nights, Bernhard Schmidt, the son of the Rothman servants, Marta and Hans Schmidt, who worked the meal service while his parents joined us, would help carry the bags and things out to our cars, or, if necessary, use the Rothman's car to drive those of us who had walked home. I furrowed my brow in confusion at what Mrs. Brooks had just said. I don't understand why the Schmidts were included in the dinner club. Were they the Rothman servants or not? For a moment, Mrs. Brooks covered her eyes with her twisted fingers. She continued speaking only when she returned her hands to her lap. Bernhard's parents, Marta and Hans, were more like family retainers than servants. They were German Gentiles who came to Vienna and began working for Helen's parents when they were young. Helen's parents, when they became older and infirm, moved in with Helen and Wilhelm, and the Schmidts came with them. When anti-Semitism became more than just a passing thought in Austria, the older Schmidts identified with the issues the Rothmans were facing and wanted to help. Because their passports allowed them to come and go freely, Helen included them as equal partners in our dinner group's activities. And their son, I asked, wondering if he could have been the traitor. Well, Bernhard wasn't involved, as he needed to be with some of the youth organizations, Mrs. Brooks said. But like his parents, he was loyal to the Rothmans. Not sure this was necessarily true, I wondered aloud why Helen mixed and matched the smugglers each month. There really was no rhyme or reason, Mrs. Brooks said. The Schmidts always traveled together, but Lloyd Edgerton and my Albert only made a trip or two. In the beginning, they were supportive of what we were doing, but used their work responsibilities and associations to beg off participating with us. That's why Lloyd's wife, Victoria, fell into being my partner for most of my trips. In the beginning, it was easy. We'd cross the border at one entry point, blubbering about the opera we'd seen, and a day or so later, one or both of us would come back to Vienna through another border point as our dowdy selves. I felt somewhat confused. What happened to the things when you smuggled into London? Mrs. Brooks shrugged. That wasn't our problem. While we were at the Rothmans, we established a time to put them outside the doors of our London homes. We had to be precise, because within minutes of the scheduled time, a courier would pick them up. Who was the courier? I never looked, Mrs. Brooks said. What I didn't see, I couldn't talk about. We all felt that way. At that time, everything was made easy for us. She looked away from me. Eventually, I asked, when did it stop being easy? Rather than answering, Mrs. Brooks looked back in my direction. I knew she wasn't seeing me. It was like a cloud or a film had dropped across her face, leaving her expression blank. She leaned back in her recliner and shut her eyes. Thinking I finally exhausted her, I was about to stop recording when she began to mumble. Because Mrs. Brooks spoke softly, I strained to hear each word, hoping my tape recorder was picking up what she said. A Not-So-Easy Crossing, June 1934. Victoria circled slowly so I could ascertain if anything was wrong with her outfit or makeup. There wasn't. I did the same for her, but she stopped me before I even had my back to her. Melinda Brooks, Victoria said, I don't know how you manage to get dressed in the morning. The lines on the back of your stockings are crooked, and you don't have the drape of your fox stole right. What do you expect? I pointed to my outfit and my painted face. None of this is me. Victoria laughed. Today, darling, it is. You've got to believe in who you are if we're going to get away with this. I agreed, but inside I didn't feel as confident about smuggling another person's possessions to London as I had felt when Helen proposed the scheme at dinner. It was far easier to walk around Vienna without painting my face and dressed in my normal street clothes. Today, I wasn't me, but then again, in some way, I wasn't supposed to be. I picked up the leather suitcase. It was far nicer than the ones Albert and I brought from London when we came to Vienna. Then, I grabbed my purse that was stuffed full of another woman's jewelry and said, "Lead the way, Victoria. I'm ready." "Good," she replied. "The car is waiting for us downstairs." The border crossing we were using today was close. As we waited in line for the guard to stamp our papers, Victoria kept running a chat of nonsense. Answering her in an equally light manner kept me from fretting until we reached the front of the line and handed our papers to the guard. His serious demeanor and the scar on his cheek belied beautifully chiseled features and perfect blonde hair. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Home to London," Victoria said. "We're here on holiday." He peered at our suitcases. "How long have you been in Vienna?" "Just a few days," I volunteered as he reached for my purse. I forced myself to relinquish it as if its contents meant nothing to me. "A few days," he repeated. "Then tell me, why do you have suitcases like you've been here for months?" He returned my purse so I could see its brimming contents, and enough jewelry to make me think you could stock a store. Flapping my hand in a poo-poo gesture, I said, "We came to see friends and attend the opera. We never know what we're going to need to wear, so we both tend to overpack." "The jewelry?" the guard said. I giggled. "But the way the world is, I don't feel comfortable leaving anything at home. I always keep my jewelry with me. Besides," I paused and smiled, hoping he would think I was an airhead, "with seeing our friends and attending 2 opera performances, I wasn't sure which outfit I'd wear. and how'd I want to accessorize it? Women, he muttered, and he stamped our papers and shooed us onward. Victoria and I didn't dare look at each other, but I bet she felt the same sense of exhilaration I did. We made it! I looked forward, in a few days, after returning to Vienna dressed as myself, to sharing the tale of our escapade with Albert. As much as the politics and tensions of the university were getting to him, I wasn't sure if he would be as amused or horrified by my adventure with the surly guard. I also wasn't positive how Victoria's husband, Lloyd, would react. She shared with me that although Lloyd was based in London, he cornered the international market, selling some type of pin that was used in guns and rifles. From what Victoria told me, it sounded like he was making a financial killing by being a loyal friend to all sides of the ongoing conflict. One thing I was certain of was that neither Albert nor Lloyd would have been pleased if we had been caught. Awake Again, 1986. Mrs. Brooks' eyelids fluttered open. The sparkle from earlier in our meeting was gone. She again called me Helen, but as she asked me for a glass of water, she seemed to know that I wasn't my grandmother. "Thank you," she said when I handed her the water. I must have fallen asleep. I do that a lot these days. "Why did you stay?" "I would have left," I said, "but you seem to be mumbling about the past." She took another sip of water and said, "I don't know what you heard or if it's even true. Sometimes my mom played tricks on me. I'm not sure if I'm here or back there." Mrs. Brooks placed the glass on the table near my tape recorder. Rather than reaching out to move my recorder in case her water spilled, I took one of her thin hands in mine and patted it. The mind can be so frightening, can't it? Her gaze met mine. Knowing that I don't know is worse than if I didn't know anything at all. I can't go back and change the past, but for now, listening to my music helps me remember and focus. La Boheme, I interjected. Yes, La Boheme. It was the last opera we saw as a group. It was also the only time we didn't go to dinner immediately afterward at the Rothmans. Instead, we were invited for dinner a few nights later. A tear escaped Mrs. Brooks' eye and slipped down her cheek. When she ignored it, I reached out and wiped it away. That was the group's last supper. She paused and then whispered, "I want to hold on to my memories of your grandmother until I can't. Listening to that opera keeps me sane." Considering I knew my grandmother had been betrayed to the Nazis, I had to ask, "Did someone in your group turn my grandparents in?" For a moment, it seemed emotionally difficult for Mrs. Brooks to focus. Finally, another tear falling, she said, "Who else could it have been?" Perhaps, I suggested, someone who worked for them, a family friend, or even someone from the arts world. You told me my grandmother was involved in more activities than the dinner group. Mrs. Brooks pressed her lips together until she got control of herself. "No, your grandparents were careful in their dealings with people. They understood the stakes. Believe me, Helen researched all of us before we were invited to her dinners." She pointed at me. "You think it was one of us too, or you wouldn't be here trying to piece together the history of your grandparents." I didn't disagree with Mrs. Brooks. Instead, I asked what she could remember about their last June 1935 supper. "It's funny," Mrs. Brooks said, "but the events of that night are very clear to me." June 1935, the Last Supper. Albert kept dawdling because he didn't want to go. I finally had to admonish him. "If you don't hurry, Albert, we'll be late. And they say women are always the one who takes so long to primp." Embracing me from behind, Albert nuzzled my ear. Softly he whispered, "We are always on time. I can think of more things to do by being late, or better yet, missing tonight's opera dinner party." I gently twisted free, but turned my head and kissed his cheek. "We've already told Helen we're coming. It would be rude to cancel." He smiled as he said, "But you can't help it if a bad headache suddenly came upon you." When I didn't respond, he moved away from me, but still made no attempt to hurry to get ready to go. Frustrated, I said, "Albert, I know you're not thrilled with being part of this group, but other than that one time, Helen and I have kept you from being involved. Besides, you do enjoy the operas and the food." He began pacing the room. "Things are changing, Melinda. At the university, there's a different kind of tension in the air. Many of my students are open in their admiration for Hitler and his rhetoric. I worry for your safety." "There's nothing for you to fret about. Victoria and I have gotten our routine down pat." Albert ran his hand through what remained of his thinning hair. "And what about the time the border patrol guard challenged you because your purse was filled with jewelry? You can only be lucky so often." "That was a blip," I said. "Once I acted the brainless, foolish woman who didn't feel safe leaving my good jewelry at home and who simply couldn't decide what jewelry to bring to accessorize an outfit for the opera. He believed me." Albert disagreed with me. "Maybe it worked that time, but I don't like that it happened." I stopped his pacing by standing in front of him and kissing him again. "Albert, I love that you care, but you worry too much. Let's get going or we'll be late." He consulted his watch. "We'll still be early. It's chilly tonight. You're going to need a coat or a wrap." At the Rothmans' door, Albert reached for the knocker, but before he could rap it against the wooden door, Wilhelm threw it open. "Albert and the beautiful Melinda," Wilhelm said. "Come in. Marta will take your coat." From behind him, Marta Schmidt, wearing her usual white apron over a gray pinafore, held out her arms while Wilhelm, looking beyond us, welcomed another guest. Albert handed Marta his long dress coat. Despite it being summer, I decided to keep my light pink shawl with me. Wilhelm ushered Albert and the man who had come in behind us and me into the Rothmans' well-lit parlor. Helen stood in the middle of the room with Lloyd and Victoria Edgerton. Because my Albert, who could talk to the side of a building, immediately struck up a conversation with the man who'd come in behind us, I walked toward Victoria, Helen, and Lloyd. When I neared them, Helen grabbed me by the arm and pulled me forward. "Melinda, come celebrate with us. Lloyd and Victoria are telling us that they have a new granddaughter." "Congratulations," I said. "Does this mean we'll be seeing less of you at these dinners because you'll be more inclined to stay in London?" "Just the opposite," Victoria said. "This is my daughter whose husband plays with the percussion section of the Opera House's orchestra." "The tall one with the flaming red hair?" I asked. "Exactly," Victoria said. "What's so exciting is that so far, it looks like our granddaughter has the same red hair." "Time will tell," I noted. "I guess that means you'll be here for longer periods of time now." "If Victoria had her way, we'd move to Vienna tomorrow, but I have a thriving business to run," Lloyd said. "This isn't the time for me to leave London. It's getting more and more difficult to do business in Vienna." At that moment, Bernard, wearing his usual butler garb of black pants, white shirt, and black vest, slid the double doors to the dining room open and announced, "Dinner is ready." Led by Helen, everyone, including Bernard's parents, proceeded into the dining room. The table, which was covered with a cream-colored tablecloth, was beautifully set for 9 with pale pink leaf-patterned china, crystal glasses, and sterling silver. As always, Wilhelm sat at the head of the table, but rather than sitting on the opposite end of him, Helen took the chair in the middle of the table. It was then that I noticed that for the first time we had seat assignment cards. As everyone found their places at the table, 2 things surprised me. The unknown man was assigned to Helen's normal seat. I stared at him, trying to figure out why she had positioned him there. His black hair was slicked back, and unlike the rest of the men who wore a coat and tie for the evening, he wasn't wearing a jacket. While his shirt was white, it wasn't a button-up dress shirt. Instead, it was made of a rougher material and was left open at the top. I could see he wore a chain with the Star of David dangling from it. Dinner was delicious. When we finished, Bernard cleared the table. As he did so, I couldn't help noticing how his fair features and blue eyes favored Marta's, who kept an eagle eye on everything her son did. Once he took the last dish back to the kitchen, Helen put her fork down. "Thank you for coming tonight. When I began this group, I chose you because of your love of opera and the compassion and humanity I see in each of you. Things in Vienna were tense then, but they're worse now. We have made a difference. but I'm asking you to consider being part of a greater effort. Helen looked toward the black-haired man. Ari? Ari spoke in clipped English, which made me think it was a second language to him. It is dangerous for me to meet with you tonight, but it is necessary to take the risk. Rather than traveling freely, like most of you, those of us who are Jewish and involved in the resistance must fear a final train ride. Until that happens, we are working to help as many people as we can escape that trip. I understand that all of you began this group knowing that none of my people who have been allowed to leave Austria could take anything with them. I thank you for that difference you have made in their new lives. But tonight, I am asking you to do something that could be even more personally dangerous to you. Rather than taking only possessions across the border, I'm asking you to consider taking children with you too. As everyone digested both their meal and Ari's request, Bernard returned with 2 platters of dessert treats. And when he left, Helen picked up Ari's proposal. The children, Helen said, will have the proper papers, but it's still a greater risk than what you have been doing. If you feel the need to resign from the dinner club, please do that now. She waited for our responses. As I glanced at Albert and then around the table, I surmised the other couples were also exchanging silent messages between themselves. In the end, none of us left. Lloyd, though, raised an important question. We all have proper documentation to show the border guards. What will these children have? Ari answered, extremely well-forged documentation showing each child who travels with you is your own flesh and blood. Still, Helen said, if you undertake one of these trips, you will need to be extremely careful. At the end of that dinner, Victoria and I each took home a suitcase that Helen had prepared for us to make another border crossing with only goods. Although Ari and Helen had left the idea in limbo, there was no discussion of actively moving a child at this time. When Victoria and I met the next day to plan where and how we'd execute our mission, we discovered that Albert and Lloyd had had the same reaction to Ari and Helen's requests. Our husbands not only believed it was time to end our smuggling game, but both had vowed not to participate again or let us continue. I gather you aren't giving in to Lloyd's wishes any more than I did Albert's? Victoria smiled. Perhaps it's my stubbornness, belief in our mission, or not being fulfilled as Lloyd is in his job, but I adamantly told him he couldn't dictate what I did. Lloyd argued with me that if I was caught, it would destroy our business because it was built on personal relationships with Brits and Germans. Lloyd went so far as to say, even if your involvement is merely suspected, it could put a giant target on our backs, like the one on the Rothmans, as Jews already have. I'm sorry, but for our own well-being, this isn't something open for discussion. We can't afford to be associated with them in the case the future Rothmans' true anti-Nazi involvement is revealed. Listening to Victoria rant about Lloyd's objections to smuggling a child, I was struck about how similar it was to Albert's. Being truthful, Victoria and I found the challenge of smuggling a child to safety exhilarating. We reached out to Helen for the bigger assignment. Despite her warning to us again about how dangerous taking a child to London could be, we were undaunted. As if the veil in front of her eyes lifted, drawing her from 1935 back to 1986, Mrs. Brooks again firmly met my gaze. Why aren't you afraid? It seems to me that Albert and Lloyd were raising valid arguments, I said. Mrs. Brooks' answer was simple. Because after a few beers, we convinced ourselves that we could rescue even one Jewish child, there would be a place in heaven for us. I gather you were assigned a child. Yes, Mrs. Brooks said. It took only a couple of weeks, but Ari and Helen matched us with the red-headed 10-year-old child whose forged papers tied him to Victoria. Did the child know what was going on, I asked. He had been very well briefed, Mrs. Brooks said. He seemed fearless. Weren't you, I said, or were you more nervous than usual? Much, she said. Perhaps it was Helen's repeated warnings or our own heightened levels of adrenaline, but Victoria and I were on the edge as we waited with the child in one of the 2 crossing lines. As we fussed over him, I glanced in the direction of one of the other and saw the Schmidts and Bernard were in it. It seemed strange that they were leaving Vienna at the same time as us. Plus, neither of them were dressed for smuggling. Still, it wasn't seeing her without makeup or jewelry or furs that made my heart stop. It was Bernard's Hitler Youth uniform. We made eye contact, but he looked away. What happened then, I asked. Mrs. Brooks didn't answer me directly. Instead, other than a few mumbled words, she simply shut down. Trying to arouse her proved fruitless. With La Boheme playing in the background, she was somewhere in her old world again. We were careful, Helen. We were careful. All right, we've reached the deliberation.
What?
This is a really intense story, isn't it?
It is, but I don't know who the heck did it. Bernard?
Okay, so Jessica Rothman is close to discovering who betrayed her grandparents, Helen and Wilhelm Rothman, to the Nazis, but she needs our help to figure out who from the final dinner party betrayed them. So here is a list in the order that we met them. So this is all people at the final dinner party.
Okay.
So we have Melinda Brooks, our narrator.
Yeah.
She's the smuggler and the last of the party remaining alive.
Okay.
Albert Brooks, her husband, he's a professor and he's opposed to Melinda's activities.
He is.
Lloyd Edgerton, an armament dealer who's opposed to his wife Victoria's activities.
Okay.
So we have Victoria Edgerton. She's also a smuggler, and she is Melinda's usual partner.
Sounds good.
We have Marta Schmidt. So she is a servant to Helen's parents that now live with the Rothmans.
Okay.
And her husband Hans, same thing, a servant to Helen's parents now living with the Rothmans.
Yeah.
Their son Bernard, who works as a servant to the Rothmans.
Yes.
And then we have Ari, the Jewish gentleman who is working to get children out of Austria.
Good guy. Good guy.
Okay, so we have
Maybe.
eight, am I counting right? 8 suspects. So most of them are in pairs. We have Melinda and Albert, Lloyd and Victoria, Marta and Hans, and then we have their son Bernard and Ari, the stranger at the table.
All right. Very interesting stuff. I don't think our narrator did it. I mean, it'd be a really cool twist if she did do it, but I'm not seeing any evidence to prove why she would want to stop, you know?
Well, do you want me to read the clues as to what Jessica knows?
Nah, let's just wing it. I'm kidding. Yeah, let's read them.
Okay, there's not many. There's only 5.
Okay.
Helen Rothman devised a scheme to smuggle valuables for Jews to England. Melinda and Victoria worked together, as did Marta and Hans Schmidt. So there were 2 smuggling couples.
Okay.
Ari is a mysterious guest who has the seat of honor at the Rothman dinner table. He, with Helen, proposes to smuggle children out as they were doing with the money and the jewels.
Fun. Good guy. Good guy. Good intentions, at least. As long as he isn't the, traitor.
Yep. Albert Brooks and Lloyd Edgerton did little to participate for the sake of their businesses. Both were afraid of the fallout should the scheme come to light. Eventually, they both wanted their wives to stop.
Well, yeah, I get that. We can't all be Schindler.
The Schmidts are German. Having worked for Helen's parents and then moving in with the Rothmans, their loyalty is to the Rothmans.
Who was that again?
The Hans
The Schmidts?
and Marta, yep.
The Schmidts are loyal to the Rothmans.
Yep. Bernard Schmidt participates in the Nazi youth movement because he's expected to. Like his parents, his loyalty is to the Rothmans.
Okay.
All right, so upon whom do we shine the spotlight of betrayal?
Well, quite frankly, I'm not actually seeing much evidence. If I had to choose, so they saw Bernard, and who was with Bernard?
His parents.
His parents. We saw the Schmidts riding off to, what, London?
Well, they were
Or
at
they
the
were just
border
at the
crossing.
border.
They're at the border crossing. Bernard is in his Nazi youth uniform. His parents are not dressed for smuggling. They have no knowledge, or our narrator, Melinda here, has no knowledge of where they're going. She just sees them.
Well, I'm inclined to think it's got to be them. It could be Ari. He had kind of a strange demeanor about him. He didn't dress as fancily. So he would definitely be a suspect. I do not suspect the Rothmans or
It's not the Rothmans. They were the ones
no,
betrayed.
sorry, you're right.
The Edgertons.
Edgertons, was that the narrator and them?
The narrator's Melinda Brooks, and her husband is Albert.
Yeah, I don't suspect those two.
Okay. So you want them colored red?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so Ari, you said, is a maybe?
Ari's a maybe. The Schmitz are a maybe. The Edgertons, I'm not fully convinced of, but Victoria seems, like a good gal, and I'm not sure that Lloyd would want to give up and possibly endanger Victoria. Even if he wanted out, I don't think that's the smart move on his part. So I don't think it was Lloyd. I don't think it was either the Edgertons.
All right. I just got my color coding mixed up. So no Edgerton. So wait. So I've gotten my
The
reds
top four
and my
are red. Yeah.
top four are red. Okay. Meaning no.
That's the Brooks and the Edgertons on the list.
Goodness.
Started coloring them green.
I did start coloring them green because I thought green meant good.
Yeah, they're good guys. You don't want to kill them.
Okay. So not the two couples. So you have the Schmitz, including their son, and Ari.
Yes. For the sake of picking, if it's the Schmitz, I feel like it's all the Schmitz. It's not just one Schmidt. They could be escaping. They could have traded information for safe passage. I'd put my money on the Schmitz.
Okay.
I have no evidence to point at any one person. I can't find a reason to.
Okay.
And this has been a good story, but there hasn't been too much, solid evidence the way that you would have in a traditional mystery. Partially just because it's a big old recollection.
Mm-hmm.
It's partially just because of how the story's told. But yeah, this one's difficult to know at the deliberation.
This is such an intense one that lately we've been trying to put more of our quote witty banner into to break up the storytelling, but it just didn't belong in this one.
No, it didn't, man. This is rough.
This is a rough one.
But no, I'll put it on the Schmitz. Maybe Bernard got convinced in all his Hitler Youth training.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll put my money there.
All right. So we are going into The Mission Goes Awry, July 1935. I nudged Victoria. Don't turn your head all the way, but look at the other line. Of course, Victoria flipped her head to say what I was referring to. What are they doing here? More importantly, what is Bernard wearing? She said. I don't like the feeling of this. Nor do I said. There was no further time for me to say anything because as we had reached the front of the line. Confidently, Victoria handed the border guard our papers. He glanced at them and then stared at me. I didn't need to ask him. Weren't you recently in my line coming from Vienna with a purse of jewelry? Before I recognized his scar as the guard who I played the foolish woman in front of in June. What were the odds of his remembering me, of being reassigned to this border point, and when there were two lines, of Victoria and me picking his? The guard snapped our papers against his hand. Where's your jewelry? Leaving it at home or simply not going to the opera this time? I smiled. Both. My husband is home with my jewelry, and rather than this being one of my opera trips, my friend here asked me to accompany her to pick up her grandson. As you can see from my outfit, there was no need for me to worry about accessorizing it. I kept the smile painted on my face even as the guard, frowning, roughly pushed his hand into the small of my back. I think the three of you best come with me. Why? I asked. Before I could move in reaction to the stronger pressure he exerted on my back, our attention was caught by a commotion in the other line. I glanced that way just in time to see Bernard raise his hand in the guard's line with the Heil Hitler salute. His parents stood silently behind him. "Come," my guard ordered. Victoria, clutching the child, and I obeyed him without another word, but I kept stealing glances at the Schmidts. They too were being taken somewhere. The difference was that rather than being part of the group with his parents, Bernard, who is deep in conversation with the lion's guard, appeared to be being treated as an equal. Eventually, we reached what appeared to be more of an office area. The guard left the three of us alone in the room. Victoria and the child, who'd been remarkably quiet, sat on the floor with her cuddling him. Like a cat, I tried to memorize everything about the room. There was the one door, no window, and only a metal desk and 2 chairs. When I heard a loud "Heil Hitler" from Bernard, I knew the Schmidts were next door. After his shout, though, any sounds from that office were muffled. Time passed. The child curled up against Victoria as they both slept. As I paced the small office, I wish I could do the same, but I was too keyed up to sit. Maybe Albert had been right about our luck running out. Or maybe, just when I thought I was going to jump out of my skin, the door to the office opened. Instead of our guard, a man wearing a commandant's uniform entered. He grabbed a chair, turned it around, and straddled it. He pointed to the other chair. "Sit," he commanded. I did. "My guard tells me you've passed this way before, but that time you were bejeweled and laughing about attending the opera." "That is very true," I answered. "I often come from London to Vienna to attend performances at the opera house, but this trip was different." He didn't take his eyes off my face as he asked, "How so?" I pointed to the still sleeping red-headed child resting now on an awake but silent Victoria. My friend needed to pick up her grandson for a short visit to London and asked me to come with her. "I very much like attending performances at the opera house," the commandant said, changing the topic. "I'm surprised you didn't catch the performance of La Bohème while you were in town. It was excellent." Victoria started to answer, but I cut her off. "I did a fortnight ago, when it began its performances. I was visiting other friends on that trip, but this trip was different." "Because you failed to not make time for the opera?" "That's partially right. You see, because this trip came up spur of the moment, as an overnight favor to my friend Victoria. I didn't have tickets or know if I'd had time to go." Thinking fast, I added, "Commandant, if you saw this version of La Bohème, you may have noticed a red-headed percussionist. If you check, you'll find that he and his wife recently had a baby girl. Big Brother here wasn't doing well with the family's new addition. Consequently, for everyone's sake, my friend and her husband opted to give the new parents a breather. I came along because she asked." He chuckled. "I have 4 children of my own. I saw the performance, and I more than understand what you are saying about our redhead here." He stood, walked to the door, and knocked on it. When it opened, the guard stuck his head into the room. "We're finished here," the commandant told him. The guard retreated, and the commandant held the door for us to leave. Snuggling the boy, lest he shout in surprise when she woke him, Victoria quickly shook the boy awake, gathering their things, and led him through the doorway. I followed. As the commandant stepped into the hallway behind me, he asked, "Who did you say you attended La Bohème with?" "The Rothmans," I said dismissively, as I kept walking. 1986. After hearing Mrs. Brooks's admission from the past, I pressed stop on my tape recorder. There was nothing else I needed to know. The end.
Did she give away the Rothmans?
She gave them away.
On accident?
On accident.
Oh, that's not good. Well, whew, I got that one wrong.
Yeah, but you even said, if she did it, she's like, you were like, that would be a really incredible twist.
Yeah, well, damn. All right. Granted, because there was no plot against it, it was just a mistake. No, there was no evidence at the deliberation onto who it would be. There was a nice little red herring with the Bernards, but
Yep.
yeah.
And
Or the
curse you,
Schmidts.
Deborah H. Goldstein, for making me cry twice while reading a story.
I heard that. I was like, wow, you really
Yeah.
can't handle her sad stories.
Yeah, between my throat is just really sore from screaming at our ill-behaved dogs, and then Deborah making me cry. It was an awesome recording for you all. I hope you,
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Good times.
Let me tell you more about our author. So Judge Deborah H. Goldstein is the author of Kensington's Sarah Blair mystery series that features a woman who finds being in the kitchen more frightening than murders. So titles of that series include One Taste Too Many, Two Bites Too Many, Three Treats Too Many, Four Cuts Too Many, and Five Bells Too Many. I love those titles. Her other writings include the novels Should Have Played Poker and Maize and Blue, and more than 50 short stories that have appeared in numerous periodicals and anthologies. Deborah's work has been named as an Agatha, Anthony, Derringer, and Claymore finalist, and received the IPPY, Silver Falchion, AWC, and BWR awards. She serves on the National Sisters in Crime Board, and previously was a national board member of Mystery Writers of America and president of the Guppies and SEMWA chapters. You can find her at deborahgoldstein.com. The link is in the show notes. So prior to recording this, I was working with Jack on, what to write for the, with all the other ones I was able to find, like famous cases. Betrayal itself is not a crime, but the act of betrayal can lead to crime, including big ones like treason, murder, and, genocide. So, did a little research, and staying with the Nazi occupation theme, meet Vidkun Kiesling. According to the BBC and other outlets, Kiesling tops many a list of the greatest traitors in history. Kiesling was a fascist Norwegian politician who met with Hitler in December 1939. In that meeting, he suggested that the British were planning to invade Norway for their own strategic purposes. To that point, Norway hadn't been a concern to Hitler. The information changed that, and in the first quarter of 1940, Germany invaded. Kiesling tried several times to take control of Norway, each time failing. In February 1942, he formed a government approved by the Germans and served as, quote, minister-president, working jointly with the German-appointed civilian administrator. He was tried during the legal purge after World War II and found guilty of murder, embezzlement, and high treason. He was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad on October 24, 1945. History has labeled Kiesling a traitor. His name has become the word Kiesling, which is a synonym for traitor, or in a contemptuous manner, a collaborator, in several different languages. And I have links in the show notes to the BBC and to the Wikipedia articles on that. So that wraps up this episode of Mysteries to Die For. Support our show by subscribing, telling a mystery lover about us, and giving us a 5-star review. Check out our new website. I guess at this point it's not new anymore, but it's still new to us. It's m2d4podcast.com. That is the letter M, the number 2, the letter D, the number 4, podcast.com. It includes links to this season's authors as well as all of our past episodes. Mysteries to Die For is hosted by TG Wolff and Jack Wolff. Opera Dinner Club was written by Deborah H. Goldstein. Music and production are by Jack Wolff. Episode art is by TG Wolff. Join us next week for a toe tag, and then come back in 2 weeks for our next original story where witness intimidation is the featured murderless crime. It's Ace of Hearts by Margaret S. Hamilton. All right, Jack, take us out.